कान के पास लगा ना। Great. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you all for the release of the research paper ROI on Apprenticeships. As India celebrates 60 years of apprenticeship system, it is time to reflect upon the past and look ahead to create an enabling system which is simplified, motivating, and a disruption in the learning system focusing on productivity and employability. In spite of a 60-year-old system, India has only 0.1 percentage participation of apprentices in the labor market, which is much smaller compared to smaller countries like Germany and Australia, which have close to 4% participation, and to the US, which has 0.3% participation rate, with a much smaller apprenticeship system. Less than 20% of the employers today actively engage with apprenticeships against 63 million enterprises in our country, compared to Queensland, a small province in Australia, which has more than 25,000 employers engaging with apprentices. The research paper on ROI on apprenticeship is a built up over the first edition released last year that was based on the hypothesis, best practices of global apprenticeship systems, and proposed productivity matrix. The current white paper is a result of a year long, extensive research, qualitative and quantitative research on the live experiences of the employers across sectors, sizes, and geographies. The key finding of the research suggests that 61% of the employers see that it's net positive value in apprenticeship. 53% of the employers ranked long-term performance and reduced cost of recruitment as their top two benefits. Nearly 50% of the employers see long-term gains, including better performance and higher retention. 60% of the employers opine that their productivity improved. 76% of the employers polled that apprenticeship reduces the attrition by building a bond of loyalty with the organization, and 63% of the employers surveyed believe that apprenticeship improved their overall performance and provided a competitive advantage over other firms. The paper highlights 3 recommendations and 5 business mantras that will help augment the ecosystem. From a policy perspective, the paper recommends to improve the growth percentage among enterprises by enabling a business-friendly environment and open markets as it holds 2.5% of apprentices as their workforce. It also suggests to enable the adoption of credit-based apprenticeship embedded degree programs suggested under NEP. Additionally, it calls for developing a tripartite association among apprentices, the academics, and industry to enhance the learning ecosystem and create a signaling value for vocational education. From an organization shift standpoint, ROI in apprenticeships paper suggests placing apprenticeships at the heart of workforce planning. Additionally, the proposal recommends creating measures to widen industry participation, creating a flexible stipend structure for apprentices, and introducing equitable management practices which help accelerate the adoption. The initiative combined will help India reach the vision of 10 million apprentices in 10 years and create an unfair advantage for brand India as many global employers look for new markets, production bases, and human capital. It's an honor for us today to have Shri Rajesh Aggarwal ji, the Secretary Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, amongst us to release the research paper. Sir, we are grateful to you to spare time from your busy schedule and be with us to do the release. I would now request you to please do the honors by lighting the lamp and releasing the research paper, sir. sir, we would now like to invite you to please address the audience with your opinion on apprenticeships and how we can, adopt it and improve the engagement. So, please. Sir, you are the one. Please.
Okay, good afternoon, friends. The just off the head thoughts. I haven't prepared any speech, so I will stick to only this topic: apprenticeship. So the journey for a student from student to being a worker. This can be very exciting. It can be very painful, or it can be a black hole. So for me, it was exciting from IIT Delhi, getting into first an IT related job, then into IAS. For some kids, especially in the skill sector we are talking about, journey can be very painful. And for some, unfortunately, it can be a black hole. Even after education, one can turn out to be unemployable, waste time in searching for a job, and in the meanwhile, frittering away any chances of self-employment or becoming an entrepreneurship, becoming an entrepreneur. So, what are the possible solutions? We talk of dual system of training or apprenticeship as a bridge from, as a transition from education to employment. So, on the dual system, basically the classic German model is it's a two campus model. One week the child is in the school, one week it is on the shop floor or in the industry, or Sunday or Monday, Tuesday in the classroom, 3 days in the industry, local industry. And the classroom also, and here classroom is equivalent to ITI or a PMKVY center or a skill university center. So the classroom has a classic classroom and a lab. So that is not dual training because the lab is very, very different from actual shop floor experience. So the focus in last few years has been on increasing the industry integration into the skilling schools. So it has been by way of industry handshake, and maybe in 1 year the kids go out for 1 month, 2 month to an industry, or some periodic exposures, or getting industry to set up the labs and give the teachers, so that the teachers who come from the industry, they teach in practical fashion, not in theoretical fashion on the machines. So we see Maruti has done about 100 labs in schools, so has Bosch in carpentry and automotive and so on, or Lakme in fashion design. So we see that kind of scenario. And on higher education also, UGC has been talking of embedded internships or embedded apprenticeships. And those things are now starting to increase. Those opportunities are increasing. And for example, I was talking to Gujarat Skill Secretary Anju, and she was telling me that in Gujarat Skill University, they are running even BA History, for example, which is embedded with skill courses, because UGC allows one-third credits to be sort of, there is a flexibility that while teaching BA History, for example, you can teach one-third syllabus on art appreciation, or you can look after the museum work and go into that aspect, and so on. So even the traditional BAs or BScs, not only BVocs and MVocs, so they are now getting into this kind of scenario. And now luckily we have the same minister, Dharmendra Pradhanji, for education and skills. So I and Anita Karwal, school secretary, and Sanjay Murthy Hires, education secretary. Our additional secretaries, Atul from my side and a lot of people from that side. Our regulators, UGC, AICT, and NCVT. We are working together on credit transfers, horizontal vertical mobility, and embedded apprenticeships. So which should earn the same amount of credits. So what we are saying is, let us say an engineering student, 4 years. 1 year the student says, I don't want to come to the college. I want to work in industry, or let us say in MBBS in the hospital, or same things for ITI or even PMKK, that sometimes you can actually spend outside the campus, work in the industry, get some scholarships or apprenticeship amount or whatever you call it, and still earn the credits. Still now, basically, these have been summer vacation. You go to industry and earn some scholarship. That does not earn you credits. And in fact, I have been talking to people today morning. Also, I was in a CIA workshop, and I was saying that new ITIs or new PMKK centers, do we really need separate buildings? Why can't Maruti or Lakme or anyone, why can't they run the training in their existing establishments by just adding a classroom, which many of them actually have already for their employees? And that can be the new model for ITIs or PMKK centers or whatever. So, industry and school shaking hands together, that is one thing. So, now what is classic apprenticeship? Where actually the act is very old, 61. There have been few tweaks to that act, and where we have been trying to encourage from the government side that industry should hire more and more apprentices. But the prescription has been more or less sort of control kinds or prescriptive kind rather than a facilitation kind. So we say that industry with 4 up to 30, they can take, if they want to take, they can take apprentices. Beyond 30, it is mandatory 2.5% to 15%, in which you can take some skilled guys or you can take freshers. So in those, basically, we see the numbers should be practically 10 to 20 lakhs per annum. While actually we have numbers in the range of 3 to 4 lakhs. So where has been the gap? So now we have been working together with all the stakeholders in a very democratic fashion that where are the gaps? And we have started unshackling the set of processes. So Sumit was part of our one such workshop, which resulted in about 50 sort of processes getting simplified. So I see people from sector skill councils also here. So a lot of simplifications are in the offing within next 1 month. So we would like that kids right from 9th to 12th, they get exposure to industry in some sense. Then kids in ITI, other skilling systems, whether a DDU scheme or any other scheme, or skill university centers, that they become more and more hands-on. We are even okay with 80-90% time being spent in industry and 10-20-30% time being spent in so-called school, which again has a classroom and a lab. So which practically means about 10% theoretical training and 90% hands-on on the shop floor or on the lab. But again, on the apprenticeship side, there is a slight con also, which sometimes labor unions say that this can be exploitative. If a guy is actually working as an apprentice for 5 years, basically it's so a period of 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, up to 3 years, depending on the trade and depending on the previous skills. So that is okay for the transition, where the guy is not getting minimum wages, but he's getting upskilled on the job. And the hope is that after 3 years, he becomes fully employable, gets a proper job, or becomes self-employed, or starts something on his or her own. So that's generally the path for apprenticeship. And I've gone through one document which Team Lee's team gave me, and it was interesting paper. And as Sumit was also presenting data that study after study has shown that apprenticeship is generally a win-win situation, both for the apprentice as well as for the industry or the employer. And also it shows that many apprentices, if the industry has the job openings, they get sort of job there, or they get job somewhere nearby if the industry reputation where apprenticeship is done is good, and the kid is generally learning well. So apprenticeship is one area where our ministry is deeply committed to, and at the senior management level now practically a consensus is emerging that one industry handshake is absolutely required. Even while studying on the job, some kind of internship apprenticeship is very useful, and government money being pumped more into apprenticeship scheme rather than plain training schemes, that can be bigger bang for the buck. So I will stop here. I basically came to learn new things, not to give you a bhashan. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It's very encouraging to hear that the reforms are in the offing and we're going to have a much more simplified system which will be conducive for the industry and for every stakeholder to take up apprenticeship and amplify the entire system as well. Thank you so much, sir. I'll now request Manish, the Vice Chairman, team this group to come and address the audience.
Thank you all for coming. Educators like Tagore or Krishnamurti or Vygotsky have always told us that we don't learn from experience, we learn by reflecting on experience. And I think it might be useful to reflect on skill development apprenticeships since 1947, right? We only have 7 lakh apprentices. If we had 2.7% of our labor force, which is what Germany has, we would have 1.5 crore apprentices. And I think there are a few reasons for that, right? It was this hard partition between education and employability. This wasn't always there. In 1938, Gandhiji had given a wonderful speech in Wardha which talked about Nai Talim, which was really a case for apprenticeships and experiential learning. But that didn't find any place in the 1948 Radhakrishnan report, nor in the 1968 Kothari Committee report, nor in the 1986 New Education Policy on Education. I think there's another reason, which is supposedly the financing failure. Right? Employers are not willing to pay for training or candidates. They're willing to pay a premium for trained candidates. Candidates are not willing to pay for training. They're willing to pay for a job. Banks or microfinance aren't willing to lend to the candidate unless a job is guaranteed. And training companies are unable to fill up their classrooms. So essentially, everybody's trying to topi pen out the other person, right? Kids want parents to pay. Parents want government to pay. Government wants employer to pay. And there has been a lot of innovation in curriculum and in delivery. But I think the next wave of innovation will have to happen in financing. Who pays? And I think this is not a uniquely Indian problem, right? $1.5 trillion of student debt in the US, 50% will probably have to be written off. So I'm not sure that that's a model that we want to copy. But we have an interesting example in India, right, this year. 5 million people will export more software than Saudi Arabia will oil. This is the first time we will do that. So this year, India will export more software than Saudi Arabia. But that's only 5 million out of our 550 million labor force. So 0.8% of India's labor force generates 8% of GDP, right? It's an oasis of high productivity. Obviously, the IITs and IIMs had an important part of it, but an early part of it was really vocational training outside the university system. The BCMCA system jumped onto the bandwagon in the early 90s or late 90s, but it really came from a non-degree system. So if we were to step back and say that what are the 5 design principles that we have learned about the perpetual motion machine which physics never found, right? That's what skill development should be. You should be able to pay skilled kids. They should get a wage premium. That wage premium should be able to pay for skills. And at least I think about now what I have learned in the last, we've hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 20 years, but we have only hired 5% of the children who came to us for a job. Those kids didn't have a birth defect. It's just that the 2 most important decisions a child in India makes are to choose your parents and your PIN code wisely. All of us are sitting in this room because we did. But the 5 design principles which could, in my mind, create the infrastructure of opportunity would be learning by learning, learning by doing, learning with modularity, learning with flexibility, and learning with signaling value. And I'll quickly just run. Learning when earning is really, really important for a country like India. All of us who had opening balances don't recognize how hard it is to escape those opening balances. So you can't take jobs to people, you have to take people to jobs. But if you can take learning to people rather than people to learning, you not only lower the cost of learning, but you make learning affordable. So it's really important to solve the financing failure for kids whose parents can't pay for them. And that's why employed learners will have to cross full-time learners sometime in the next decade in India. Learning by doing, soft skills are not taught, they are caught. All of us caught our soft skills by being allowed to be in the workplace, and we can't agree on what soft skills are. We don't know how to measure soft skills. We don't know how to teach them. But we know that the kid who moves from Kanpur to Bangalore is suddenly in 6 months, cutting his fingernails, tucking his shirt in, shaving every day, and the soft skills. So there's nothing wrong with that kid, right? At least it's my view of the world that there's no such thing as poor people. There are people in poor places, right? An electrician moves from Patna to Bangalore, gets 4 times salary, same person. And a plumber who moves from Nigeria to the US gets 25 times more salary. So there's no such thing as poor people. There are people in poor places. The same thing applies to skill development, right? So learning by doing makes skills demand driven, and it makes it the soft skills where really the wage premium lies in today's world. In a world where Google knows everything, in a world where automation captures a lot of manual labor, knowing is no longer valuable. It is learning how to learn, and that's a soft skill. Learning with modularity. A 3-month certificate has an opening balance for a 1-year diploma, has an opening balance for a 2-year advanced diploma, has an opening balance for a 3-year degree, is really important because you have to have multiple on-ramps and off-ramps. Learning with flexibility. An on-campus classroom has to be equal to an online classroom, which has to be equal to an on-the-job classroom, which has to be equal to an on-site classroom. You cannot have this apartheid in your head where you say that one classroom is somehow more valuable, because everybody has different abilities. And in the repair, prepare, and upgrade continuum, you need different classrooms in different proportions for different people at different skill sets. So the flexibility of multiple classrooms is not recognized by the education regulator. And the main one is the learning with signaling value. Michael Spence got his Nobel Prize for his work on the social signaling value of higher education. I went to Wharton, my wife went to Harvard. These are good places to be at, but better places to be from. The biggest value is being from IIT, not at IIT. And so I think we have to recognize that. But how do you recognize that, and why does that matter for skill development? It's because Peter Diamond got his Nobel Prize for search costs in labor markets, which was an interesting insight 20 years ago, 15 years ago. But 2 years ago, Shapley and Roth got their Nobel Prize for their basic insight that equity markets clear on price, but labor markets clear on information. And that is really what the signaling value of apprenticeships combined with degrees sort of ends up in. So I think, there has to be some change in the system, which will be two kinds of universities. There'll be research universities, which will be small and physical. There will be skill universities, which will be multimodal delivery, but also sort of large numbers and not generating research. Only 32 universities out of our 1,000 in India are currently licensed for online learning. It makes no sense. There are 400 overseas universities operating in India. Nobody can stop them. So why do you stop your own people? It's sort of a reverse Atmanirbhar Bharat in my mind, even though the FM had announced in her Atmanirbhar speeches that 100 would be automatically given, but that hasn't happened. I think the biggest change that will have to happen is the tripartite thought world. See, the apprenticeships is a bipartite thought world between the kid and the employer. Degrees are a bipartite thought world between the university and the kid. But degree apprenticeships are a tripartite thought world. The university brings something, the kid brings something, and the employer brings something. And today we have no framework for a tripartite thought world, because in a government organized vertically, this problem is a horizontal. But I think, 3 things have happened. One is we finally have a minister who is responsible for both skills and education. Second, I think COVID is creating a new world of work and a new world of organizations. Employment is shifting from a lifetime contract to a taxi cab relationship. My parents had 35-year careers. I'll probably have a 45-year career. My kids will have a 55-year career. And for a 55-year career, you can't milk what you did up front for 12 years or 15 years. But I think NEP as a document, at least in my mind, it fixes the birth defects. Or maybe let me not be harsh. It fixes the lack of imagination that I find in the 1948 Radhakrishnan report, Kothari Committee report in 1986, which was every university looks like Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard. That's not possible for a country like India. Our per capita income is what it is. We are 138th in the world in per capita income. We may be 5th in the world in total GDP, but we are 138th. So I think NEP just recognizes that the massification of higher education will require a convergence of employability and education at the intersection of employment. Right? We have treated the threes as three planes taking off from three separate runways: education, employment, and employability. I think NEP imagines is at least three planes taking off from the same runway. I don't think it's the one plane, which we will get to, but at least we all have to be rowing in the sort of same direction. And as Mr. Aggarwal said, I think that for the first time, at least in 15 years, that I wrote my first reform paper on the National Skill Mission, chaired by Manmohan Singh, when I was a member then in 2008. Or 2007. It was for the Planning Commission. I did a report, and you could change the date on that report and not go very wrong. Though I would submit, apprenticeship reform was the 20th point in Indira Gandhi's 20-point program in 1975. Most of you may not remember that, but the 20th point was Apprenticeship Act reform in 1975. So I hope we'll sort of get it done now. I hope we will converge it. The main optimism I have, and I don't need to cover it with most of you, is today's report. I am finally no longer having apprenticeship conversations as CSR. I'm not having it as charity. I think most CFOs that I am able to convince, because of the four upsides of a well-designed apprenticeship program: lower attrition, higher productivity, lower cost of hire, and faster time to hire. I can prove to every CFO that your hurdle rate for capital expenditure, it may be 10, it may be 12, it may be 14, depending on your cost of capital. A well-designed apprenticeship program pays for itself in somewhere between 3 and 5 years. And obviously, we've got 7 case studies in here. We're grateful to many of the employers who opened up their insights for us to be able to study them. But I think I am now confident that if the regulatory cholesterol, which doesn't allow degree apprenticeships, doesn't allow online education, doesn't recognize 4 classrooms, goes away, we could easily go to 10 million apprenticeships. And so I think if you think about the next 20 years for India, it's really, really important to think about what is the binding constraint here. How does IT with 5 million people, which is going to 10 million, by the way, because of COVID's digitization, generate 8% of GDP with 0.8% of the labor force? And why does agriculture with 42% of the labor force generate only 14% of GDP? Because poverty is about productivity, right? And productivity of firms and productivity of individuals is an interesting dance. Is somebody at Infosys really more productive than somebody at a smaller IT firm in India? Or is somebody at TCS really much more productive? Yes. The reality is that revenue per employee is obviously 5 times higher in the top 3 IT firms than in the 20th to 25th IT firms. And it's always fascinated me. Was it selection of people? No, it is a combination of productivity at the firm level and the individual level. So we just finished a report with the World Bank. In manufacturing companies, if you rank manufacturing companies by size at the 10th percentile and 90th percentile, the biggest and smallest companies, there's a 24 times difference in productivity of their employees. Now, is that embedded in the air? I think it is. So I think it's very important for us to recognize that productivity of enterprises, productivity of regions. I live in Karnataka. My parents retired. They were in the civil services to Kanpur. And, Karnataka and UP have the same GDP, but we do it with 1/4 the people, And so are we 4 times more productive? Bangalore's GDP is now $11,000, right? So if everybody in India lived in Bangalore, we would have a $14 trillion economy, not a $2.5 trillion economy. So I think that productivity at firm level, regional level, and individual level is really important and linked to this. And from my perspective, somebody who was born and brought up in Kashmir, I was just reading about the 1962 war, and we were appealing to the masses to knit sweaters and knit socks and knit blankets for our poorly equipped soldiers. And to my mind, it was sort of important to think about, where does strength come from? My favorite Hindi poet Ramdhari Singh Dinkar used to say, right, Shama shobhati us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho. Only snakes who have venom can be generous, kind, or benevolent. And so if you think about what is the strength of a country, it always is human capital. I think India is an outlier with no country with $2,500 is exporting $160 billion of software. So we already have a unique example of where we have created, through a combination of education, employment, and employability, an oasis of high productivity. But I think if you think about apprenticeships, if you think about finally an ROI where you're not appealing to the kind heart and the generosity of employers, we are appealing to them to sort of fix their people's supply chains or reimagine their supply chains so that they have higher productivity, they can have lower attrition, they can have faster time to hire. So I think many things are coming together. If NEP really gets implemented in its full spirit, if we narrow the distance between the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Skills, I think Indian employers are sort of ready to take this 7 lakh number to 10 million in my mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Manish. Over the last 7 years, more than 700 employers across sectors have joined hands with us to enhance the employability and livelihood of over 3.25 lakh youth through apprenticeships. It's heartening to see their intent and active involvement to make apprenticeships an integral part of the talent creation process and apprentices an integral part of their teams. Many had to overcome systemic and cultural challenges to make way for apprenticeships. Many set the examples to be the first one in the sector to get started, while many got motivated to see the outcome of the other employers and got started. In the long run, everyone got the desired returns on the investments made in apprenticeships. We would like to acknowledge each and every employer who have supported the cause of the youth employability enhancement through apprenticeships and have been a source of encouragement for many organizations to take up apprenticeships. Today, we have with us few employers who are trendsetters in apprenticeship engagement and have been a part of the research in assessing the cost-benefit analysis of the outcome of apprenticeships. We would like to acknowledge and express gratitude for their contribution and extending their support. So, may I like to invite you to please felicitate the organizations. Manish, please. Great. I would like to call upon Ritu Bhatia, who's the Vice President for HR from Genpact. Ritu, thank you so much. I think we bothered you too much, and I think we've seen the outcome now. Fantastic. We've got Mr. Mohsin Khan, who's representing Cravitex Brands, which is the Pro line. I think they've been very actively involved in the retail sector in engaging with apprenticeships and have been really, really extensive part of this research as well. Would like to call upon Mr. Subrito Sarkar, representing Mahindra Financial Services. He's the North Circle head. I think they were the pioneers in doing the apprenticeships in the NBFC sector and have been very instrumental in doing the cost-benefit analysis for apprenticeships. Would like to now call upon Mr. Ronak Singh, who's representing Ginger Hotels. I think hospitality itself has been involved, but Ginger Hotels have also been, worked with us on doing the research work and coming up with this white paper. Ms. Mansi Das, who's the Group CHRO for the Vikas Group. Ma'am, I think we bothered them to the core to get the data points and everything to get the research paper. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Ms. Neha Oberoi, who's heading the HR for the Lotus Herbals. Neha, thank you so much, Neha, for all your support. and I would say unconditional support. Thank you so much, sir. So please, now, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. A small piece of token from our side. Can I just get all the, please, the employers who got their seals, please be here. We can just have a group picture. Thank you. Please. Thank you once again to everybody for helping us in doing this research paper. Please. Sir, please. Manish, please. Please, sir. Sir, सबके साथ. अभी वीडियो को लोग लगे actually all of So I thank everybody for joining us today. I think it was wonderful to have you all over. I know all of us, I mean, all of you have a busy schedule, and to make time for us, that was really nice of you. Thank you once again, and please do join us for the tea. Thank you.